Welcome back to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. Today I'm talking with Tom Smith, PhD. Tom is originally from Ireland, but since earning his PhD in human geography from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, he's been a true world traveler. While Tom enjoyed these experiences, his story highlights the common challenge among academics of being able to find a steady job in a place where you can settle down, especially if you have a partner and family. Over the last 10 years, Tom served in several postdoc appointments in the Czech Republic and Germany. He moved to the Netherlands for his wife's work, and now that Tom has left academia and taken his editing work full-time, he and his family have been able to settle in Spain. In our conversation, Tom shares how he began working as an academic editor while a PhD student to supplement his income. He gradually increased his workload in between postdocs, and he recently left academia and is making a career in academic editing. We also discuss the global nature of the challenges in academia with workload and burnout, and how much more joyful life can be when you begin a career that actually gives you the time to do things like pursue hobbies and spend time with family without feeling guilty about it. Finally, Tom shares the steps he's taking to attract new clients, some downsides of platforms like Upwork, and how you can balance academic editing as a side hustle or take the work full-time when you're ready. I think you'll enjoy this conversation, and I hope you get a lot out of it. Now, here's my interview with Tom. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. So today on the podcast, we have Tom Smith. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Paulina. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So you are relatively new to full-time editing, but you've been editing as a side hustle for quite a while as an academic. Why don't you start off by telling us about your background in academia? What did you do before you started editing?
Yeah, so I entered academia around 2014, so pretty much 10 years ago now. I'm from Ireland originally. I started quite a typical journey of international academic work. So you're moving a lot from country to country. So I moved to Scotland to do my PhD. And after that, I moved to the Czech Republic for a postdoc. I moved to Germany for a postdoc. I moved with my wife to the Netherlands. And I'm now based in Spain, in the north of Spain. So sort of all along that journey at different times, I've been using academic editing as sort of supplementary income, I suppose, sometimes during my PhD, and then at other times I would maybe do it a bit more full time, and then say in between postdoc positions, and then more recently, as I moved out of academia full time, I've been relying on it more as sort of my main main form of livelihood, basically. So.
And what field were you in when you were in, what's your PhD in?
Social sciences, so human geography. So the more humanistic side of that discipline. And yeah, I sort of got into it, I suppose, because I always liked writing. I was a non-academic editor, let's say, of a small publishing organization, an environmental publishing organization. So I was doing a lot of nonfiction, working with nonfiction authors and things like that. So I started having to proofread their pieces and edit their pieces. And then I made the transition into starting the PhD. And one of my colleagues on that project actually works as an academic editor. So when she had too many jobs, she would maybe pass something along to me. So I started sort of dipping my toes in that manner, and realized that, I had the skills for it. I liked writing. I liked sort of focusing on other people's writing and helping them improve it. The ability to pick up sort of smaller errors in close proofreading or conceptual issues and more developmental stuff. So that sort of started during my PhD, and I started helping out colleagues, sometimes paid, sometimes unpaid, and it was just sort of an incremental process, I think, quite an uneven journey. Yeah. So I've done all sorts of things, from sort of one-to-one work with clients and colleagues and friends to working for agencies as well. And I also do some editing work within NGOs and academic research networks and things like that. So I've sort of, I've been trying to experiment with different ways that different places you can work, and I've had some successes, and then, there's been harder sides of it, like some of the agencies that would pass you work, for example. Maybe we can talk about that at some point. But there are very different sort of pay scales and very different working conditions and expectations. So all of those things have pros and cons. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a foggy or confusing space, I think, to enter. I remember when I was first starting, I talk a lot about how I would Google remote academic editor or something like that, and you get all of these websites that pop up, and it's hard to figure out which are legitimate and which are scams, and then you get directed to Upwork, which can be sort of a black hole for people, and tough to find work there, although some editors do have success with it. So that's great that you had this connection in graduate school. And I mean, I wish I had known about editing when I was a grad student, because I definitely could have used that income, the additional money coming in. So you said you had some postdocs. So you were successful at getting these positions after you graduated. What led you to decide to leave and to go full time with the editing?
Yeah, I think it's a shared sentiment that I've listened to a few of your past podcasts. I think there's a shared sort of refrain of discontent with modern academia and a lot of the conditions of work, the structures of work. In my case, I think there are probably comparisons between North America and Europe in lots of ways, and there's, I think, increasingly comparisons globally in terms of publish or perish, or prioritizing quantity of publication over quality, and things like this, expecting like publishing job adverts where the expectations are incredibly high, and that it'll sort of creep and take over your life a little bit. And yeah, I enjoyed parts of it. I think I was, on paper, like, I think my CV is quite good. I was getting postdoc positions, like you said. I published in really like good quality geography journals and publications that I'm very proud of, and worked with colleagues really that I think are some of the best at what they do in the world. I think this is like, there is some incredible work being done, including stuff that I worked on, but the framing conditions and the lifestyle that it expects of you was something that I think ended up it takes its toll. And especially if you are looking for stability, looking for example, settling down with a family. We were moving really, every year maybe, or every 2 years, maximum 2 years would have been a luxury, so this is sort of built into what the expectations are of you. So my funding was often mobility funding. So you have to move between European countries to be eligible for it, for example. So you're instantly uprooted from your social network, from your friends, from your family. If you have a partner or children, you have to move with them as well, and they get uprooted as well. And you have to negotiate whether the job comes first or whose job comes first. It's a whole very common, amongst colleagues and friends that I've had in academia, it's quite a common situation. And I think ultimately I decided that I always had, before I started my PhD, I had a lot of passions. Having a garden, being close to the land, having a community of people. A lot of my research is focused on sustainability and grassroots sustainability networks, and I was sort of the antithesis of that. I was always in places I wasn't necessarily comfortable, big cities, moving between. I was never able to really sort of engage with the projects I wanted to, or if I did, I would have to leave after a few months and never get the sort of continuity I wanted. So yeah, I think after 2 or 3 postdocs, and a lot of hard work and projects and successfully getting really interesting research funding, at the end I just thought, okay, this isn't really sustainable, and I can't keep. I was sort of at a crossroads, I guess. So I had to either choose, I go for a permanent position in academia, and that is the life I would have for at least the next 5 to 10 years, if not longer, or I take a bit of a leap and try to fulfill some of the life that I'd envisioned for myself, maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, when I really got interested in the issues that I ended up researching, you know. And I was lucky because I really was passionate about a lot of things I researched, but that life of expecting constant movement, expecting that your whole life should revolve around a job, is kind of the wrong way around for me. So I think that was kind of the key thing. But I mean, there's lots of other smaller. I think there's been an acceleration in expectations. So maybe my CV now maybe will get me a permanent position, or maybe it won't, you know. And then 30, 40 years ago, it definitely would have, or the expectations would have been different even if it did. Or yeah, I think it's just it was tricky, and it was a decision I just kind of had to make, because you either continue with it and then you look back and realize that's been it, that's been your working life, or you consider some change and living maybe in accordance with values or other priorities like family or friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience with, you feel like you said, you get to this crossroads, or this decision point where you have to decide, am I going to pursue the career and all the, supposed prestige and whatever that comes along with it, even though it makes me personally miserable to have to be moving all the time and to never have time for myself or my family? Or am I going to choose to have a happy life and find a different career that also makes me happy? I think we get into this trap as academics, thinking that this is the only thing that we'll ever enjoy doing in our lives as a job. And it's just, it's completely wrong. I think we're a lot more flexible than academia teaches us that we are. And we really do have the skills to do other things, and those things can make us happy. So yeah, you mentioned gardening, and I love to garden, and we have, several raised beds here on our property in Maine, and that's like what I look forward to all winter. But I know that if I had stayed in academia, I never would have had the time or the mental bandwidth to do any hobbies. And so I think that's been the biggest transformation for me in my life, is having space in my life for things other than my work, which sounds really sad when you talk about it, but that's what I think so many academics experience, that their work just takes up every corner of their lives, and they have no room for anything else.
Yeah, I think the bandwidth sort of phrase is right. I think it sort of absorbs a lot of your time. I mean, I think the sense of freedom is definitely a false sense of freedom. I was always having to think about the next position, or always having to plan the next funding application, or or even just the current expectations. This is the thing, that you need massive bandwidth to work in something that demands so much of you. So you have to be thinking ahead, you have to be producing now, and a lot gets sort of sacrificed for that. I remember being on holidays. I was living in the Czech Republic, being on holidays in Croatia on a beach, and being completely unable to just actually have a holiday, just to switch off and say, okay, this time is blocked for just me and my own enjoyment. And actually what was constantly imposing on me were all these other obligations and other expectations. And that can happen in any industry. I don't want to say it only happens in academia, but I think I've seen enough evidence and both anecdotal and sort of like research, and you can just see it happening. This acceleration of a competition, competition for resources, the need to sort of pedal faster just to keep up. There was some research a couple of weeks ago that came out showing how many people actually stay publishing after a certain amount of time. And I think after, was it 8 or 10 years, there's less than 50% of people are still publishing who have one publication, and then they trace them to see at what point they are still publishing or not. And so I think this idea that it's the only way or the only thing you can do, people obviously find other ways, and people obviously don't find it necessarily sustainable. And I think, it was one of my struggles was, okay, I've done this now for 10 years, basically, from entering grad school to having my postdocs and then deciding to leave. And after 10 years, you feel very pigeonholed, and you feel very incapable of working in other spheres. I mean, I'd had collaborations with some NGOs on research projects, and I had, like, it depends. Obviously, everyone has a slightly different trajectory and different ways of working. So I knew that there were sort of maybe other areas that I could try to transition into, but it was really intimidating and very difficult, because I think you're so used to your CV looking one way, you're so used to your self-description being one way, and your idea of yourself and what you do. And actually within the academic sphere, you're project management, editing, people management and writing, and all sorts of research skills, and just a lot of soft skills as well. You really develop a lot of these things, but I don't think that's made evident to us. And so you end up feeling like, okay, there's this limited band of jobs that I can apply for, and I just sort of have to stay down this road. And for me now, I one of the great things is I've made this move. I have a different life now. I have to be a little bit more flexible. I live in a rural area. My wife has a job in a different village, so I can sort of have the freedom now to do things that previously I couldn't, in terms of that as well, in terms of prioritizing other people, other activities. And it's so far it's good. I won't say there aren't challenges, and we can also get into that, but I do not I don't regret it, let's say.
That's great. Yeah, I don't think I've talked to anybody who ever regretted leaving. I have heard some people who went back. They left. They went back to academia, and then they left again. So I guess they do exist. But so as you were making this transition to going to with a full-time editing, what are some of the strategies you've been using to try to bring in more clients?
Yeah, I mean, one thing just before it slips my mind, you mentioned Upwork. I actually did or have dabbled with it. It is quite a dark platform from my perspective, in terms of having to pay them for you to get work that they then take a cut out of, and this kind of race to the bottom where you're really competing with very it's really just a global competition marketplace, and a lot of the jobs on it are very irrelevant, or are nowadays sort of trying to use editors to correct AI text or whatever. I don't really know what it is, a lot of it, but it has been a source of some good clients. So I wouldn't rule it out completely, but I have less and less sort of paid attention to it as a tool. What I did was, firstly, because I'd already been editing, I spoke with colleagues. So that was important. Actually, I think referrals and friends and repeat clients is something that's really important. So if you've worked with a colleague and they know your work is good, then they will always recommend you. So the fact I'd already been doing that sort of helped smooth things. So I think within the first couple of months, I was working on a quite a big book project, academic anthropology book, and it was fantastic. It was really interesting, really high quality work, because I mean, I can criticize the structures of academia, but I don't want to say that there aren't people who are happy and doing really good work in there, and there are as well, for whatever reason. Like they may be more able to put boundaries on things maybe as well. I mean, that's maybe part of it, but Yeah, there are people thriving as well, I'm sure. I would say it's more of a struggle every year that passes with the system the way it's structured. But yeah, so I got some work, for example, on that book, and that was really great because that was a sign. It was via someone who I'd edited a PhD thesis, then her friend had this book, and it just sort of rolled a bit like that. So that was nice. It's not always like that. Um, you also have to seek things out. So I also started editing for some research networks that I'm part of, which has been really valuable as well because it allows me to stay in touch. Because like I say, I was passionate about what I was researching, and I was passionate about the work my colleagues were doing, and yeah, it's not something I wanted necessarily a fully clean break from, but I wanted a break from academia, not the ideas and the concepts and the frameworks and the colleagues and the research. So what I'm trying to do is, it's been about 7 months, I think, since I really registered here full time as a freelancer. And I've been trying to keep that balance of like keeping my expertise, keeping my skills, my social science background, and looking for ways of working on that. So I've been editing a really large book project, working on papers, working on some proposals for books as well. And yeah, it's just been varied and refreshing and given me the freedom to focus on, house renovations and the garden and my family and things like that. So yeah, but I was planning, and I think maybe 6 months before I really my final contract in academia ended, I was looking ahead and looking out for opportunities that would sort of be a bridge in a way. And I think that was important. Yeah.
So so my background is in U.S. politics, which we're filming this on Election Day in the United States, so I'm a little bit nervous. But I'm curious because I don't get a lot of political science papers to edit, but when I do, I always sort of question myself. How much should I give like substantive feedback on, as if I were a peer reviewer? I'm curious how you handle that. If you get something that's sort of close to your field or that you have substantive expertise in, do you like offer critiques on that, or do you just restrict yourself to like the copy edit or the, whatever it is that you're hired to do?
Yeah, for me, it depends on the project, and it depends on the communication that happens before you start in a way. So the book project, for example, it wasn't in sustainability or human geography or something like that, but there were enough sort of social science concepts that I was quite close to it. And I knew that for her focus was mainly on the language. And so there was sometimes the use of terms I would sort of play around with or make more substantive changes, but always sort of making sure that she would have the last say, for example. And I sort of just restricted myself to the more close reading and the sort of changes in copy and things like that. It really depends. Yeah, like the book project I'm working on, because that is close to me. I try to understand a piece from that author's perspective, and even if it's not my piece, and they have a way of writing, and they have a certain framework they're using, and there's only so far without having a deeper conversation with someone that I'm going to change something or suggest bigger changes or new ideas. So it comes down to it changes job to job for me. I don't know if you've found that as well.
Yeah, I think rather than making suggestions, I might leave a comment and say, if they're talking about some topic, I'll say, oh, this reminds me of so-and-so, and I'll cite, an article or something that, in case they, haven't thought about it or aren't familiar with it or something. So yeah, I think you're right. You do have to be sort of delicate, they're hiring you to be an editor, not a peer reviewer, but
or a co-author. You're also not a co-author, right? So
yeah,
I think the comment function for me is always something I use quite liberally, just because I think it's important that they know there are these other perspectives. Maybe, you're an experienced academic, you can improve their work in many ways. Obviously, if you're being paid for one particular job as well, I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's going to be your main responsibility. So, yeah, but I think that is the advantage you have. You can be an editor without a PhD or without having conducted research in a field or without there are plenty that do a really good job. But at the same time, I think for me, it's important for me to kind of leverage the experience I've had and the networks I've worked in and the ideas I've worked with, and to, where it's relevant, sort of apply those and help people who are working in that area, and try to carve out some sort of specialism, even though I'm always open to other fields and other disciplines and other work. But at the same time, as I've been feeling my way into doing this work full time, I also realized, for example, at the beginning, I was maybe marketing myself as an editor because I had done nonfiction and other types of editing in the past. And then I realized, no, you know what? If I have a selling point, it's going to be that I'm an academic editor, for example. And, and I've done editing of natural science materials where I don't really have a good understanding of the field. I would often get passed like biology papers over the years, basically like biology papers, or a lot of marine biology for some reason. I ended up editing that someone kept passing me, and I've got no knowledge in that area, so conceptually I couldn't add anything. But I was honing there would always be grammar mistakes and things that needed fixing and citations and all sorts of things. So you can work in those fields, but for me, the interesting work and the place that I might be able to be more useful to people is probably something closer to my interest, where I can also give them that substantive feedback. And and we live now, if you're trying to work remotely, it essentially means there's a global marketplace and there's going to be a lot of people. So when I was thinking, okay, am I an editor? I would like to edit various different things. I like to sort of dip my toe in a lot of different writing styles and whatever. But at the end of the day, if it's going to be viable for me, and the thing that I've been doing is publishing in academic journals and that I have had success in, I may as well double down on that, because otherwise, if I don't communicate it, there's no positive feedback cycle of people thinking of me, or if I don't double down on it myself, who else is going to, respond to that? So it was important for me that I sort of clarified what exactly I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people feel a bit uncomfortable about advertising themselves, or even just like sending an email, especially the people who are just leaving academia. They feel a bit strange writing to their colleagues and saying, "Hey, I'm an editor now. Let me know if you have any projects." And I try to the folks that are in my editing community, I try to remind them that you're helping people. There are people out there who need your help. They need your guidance. Having been an academic, that it's so easy to get overwhelmed and to be just burdened by so much work. And I think scholars who work with editors know how helpful they can be and how they can, we exist not just to correct their language and clean up their writing, but to help them tackle these tasks that they just don't have the time for. I suggest that people think of themselves as being helpful as opposed to, trying to sell something. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just jump in and say I do think that selling something and making that shift into essentially becoming a small business owner or running an entrepreneur or whatever you want to call it, it is essentially what you end up doing. And I do think that is one, I think as academics, you have a lot of strengths, but that's one of maybe the weaknesses, where you've become used to having a certain salary and maybe working on projects, and the shift over can be a challenge and can feel strange because you've never done it. But at the end of the day, I do think people end up just appreciating what you can do, and you end up getting that same feeling of helping someone and fulfillment. And there is this intrinsic benefit that comes from it. So yeah, I think that fear or that, I don't say like like you maybe feel a bit dirty or selling something, right? Suddenly you're having to sell something and you've never done that before. But that feeling falls away. I think it's not a, it's, it's, you're just communicating what you can do, and people value that. So then, they might take you up on it or they might not in the end.
Yeah, I think if you make a post on LinkedIn or something, you're putting out your shingle, right? Your sign that says, "Here I am, I exist." And if people aren't interested, they won't contact you. And if they are, then they will, in which case they're going to be grateful that you're there. So thinking about the technical aspects of editing, I don't have an editing certificate, and I tell most faculty that I work with that I don't think that they need to get an editing certificate. But I'm wondering if you did any training in like editing or Microsoft Word or anything like that, or how did you hone those skills as you moved from being an academic to becoming an editor?
Yeah, no, I also haven't. There's also professional associations and things like that exist, and I have no idea. I'm open to feedback on those because again, doing this full time is something quite new to me. So maybe there's a unique benefit to that, and I should follow it up. But really, for me, what counts is my experience. That people can read my work, read my background, and then also just the feedback. The immediate feedback, for example, when I was being passed work, it was really that other person's reputation as someone who runs an agency that was on the line. And so if she wasn't happy with my work, or if the work wasn't to a good enough standard, she wouldn't have kept passing it to me anyway. So I always had this awareness of sort of, okay, and there was loads of resources online that I could learn from. And I was always sort of searching for things and making sure I had things right and that I understood different styles. And yeah, I think again, it's a strength as a researcher is that you have that ability to go away and learn and improve yourself. And I never saw a need to engage in any sort of certification on that. It may be beneficial, and it may be beneficial commercially to have that somewhere advertised. But so far for me, I don't really see the need, because you have a PhD, you have a sort of a whole professional backdrop that people can look at and say, okay, this person is trustworthy and will do a good job and polish things to a high standard. Agencies, I've done very little work so far. Just with the trajectory I've been on, I haven't done this so much, but it may be something I look into more in the future, is doing like editing tests and then working for agencies and things like that. So I did a few of those just after I finished my PhD. I basically went traveling and used a little bit of editing to fund that travel, essentially. So like digital nomad type. I just needed a break basically, and took a few months off and did that. That was not a great experience in terms of the quality of the work that was being passed to me was very low. It was taking a lot of time, and it was really badly paid, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't something that I stayed doing for all that long. It was probably just my own bad choice, my own lack of knowledge of which companies to work with and whatever. But those agencies did pass me tests that, you have to complete an editing test. And then if it's good enough, they will start sending you work. I presumably just was naive at the time and didn't really know who these companies were. And yeah, so that's something that I think I would look into more in future. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my experience at least is the vast majority of them, the pay is pretty terrible. I know there are some that pay only half a cent per word. And that should be illegal, because that's just, I don't see how you could make more than $10 an hour or so at that rate. There's others. I usually tell the people in my community, if they don't pay at least 1.5 cents per word, then you shouldn't work for them. Which that's still quite low. But on the other hand, when you're starting out, you don't have to do the marketing. You don't, the work just falls in your lap. And they send it to you, and you can focus on perfecting your editing skills. And even some of them provide, their quality assurance people provide you with feedback, and so that can be helpful. I think
you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think you're right that I didn't have the knowledge of any of that. So I think it's important that you communicate those kind of things with people as to expectations and salaries. Um, because I had zero knowledge of that. I can't even remember now what I was being paid in terms of per word or per hour, but it was very minimal. But it was an experience, and it was part of my experience that sort of helped me to hone the skills for sure. There were senior editors that then would give you some sort of feedback, if I remember correctly. So you knew that there was like a quality assurance process going on, and when you work freelance and completely on your own, you don't quite have that. But yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, because and there's nothing wrong with jumping right into working with private clients. I think that's great if it works out. But I recommend the agencies that pay on the higher end, because you do get that feedback that you can incorporate. Whereas if you work with a private client and they're unhappy with your work, they just won't hire you again.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get the kind of detailed feedback that an agency might give you about, what you need to change. But yeah, I think it is that I see a lot of editors who get their work just from agencies or from book publishers for years. And they complain about making only $20 an hour, $30 an hour, and they seem like they're stuck. And I know I think I felt challenged about going out and getting private clients initially, because I thought, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. I can't charge more money. And then I finally just did it, and life was so much better. You can really make a lot more when you're working with private clients. But there was a little bit of an, imposter syndrome or whatever. I think, feeling like, oh, I can't be an entrepreneur. That's, owning a business is too much. So, yeah. So what is your vision for your own business, say, over the next year? Do you think you mainly do copy editing, or a mix of developmental editing, you going into coaching, or what do you think your vision is for the next year or so?
Coaching wise, I don't have any experience in that, and I don't plan on anything like that. I really want to focus on creating a sustainable business. So what I will say is, of course, there are lots of benefits in terms of real freedom. In academia, you have a sort of false freedom. With editing, I do have real freedom. I really am in charge of my own time. But the downside of that, of course, is like, as any freelancer, whether you're a marketer or a copywriter or like an editor or whatever it is, as a freelancer, you're almost always going to have this, for me, like an existential uncertainty to deal with. And that's something that I need to start facing now, is like, okay, in 2-3 months' time, I don't know who my key clients will be, or what my client base will be. And that's what I need to. So for this first 6 months, 7 months that I've been working, I've had some sort of keystone clients, I would say. And they will be dropping off over the next few months. And so now I'm focusing on the editing side of things, in terms of how do I build stability, a strong client base, how do I market myself? These are things that I think I had a little bit of luck early on, that sort of a few jobs just sort of fell onto my lap, and I didn't really have to go and search them out too much. And I think that just sort of postponed the need to do that, or to start thinking forward about marketing and planning. And, I set up a website, but I'm pretty sure that none of the work I've got has actually come through that yet, because I haven't used it properly, or so I really just have that sole focus of continuing my transition. So I've been finishing some of the academic work I was working on. There was a lot of things I put many, many months of work into that I really wanted to finish. So I've also had that going along on the side. And so as all of that drops off, and as these early projects, which just sort of I stumbled upon, also drop off, I have to really, things will get real basically over the next 6 months to a year. And I really have to focus on making sure that I do things properly. I think your resources have been really useful for me to think about how that could be. I was sort of just bouncing naively along and just sort of, like I said, I kind of got burnt working for agencies before that I was probably being paid really badly. And maybe then in my head, I thought only through private clients it was possible. And I didn't really have a clear picture of what's possible. So I think, engaging with some of the things you've been doing has been really helpful for me to really sit down and go, okay, what is this sort of sector or industry, and what's my place in it, and how do I make it sustainable? Because I've never had to do that before. So we'll see, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you found the podcast and the other resources helpful. I think there's a lot you can do long term to sort of plant, going back to the garden metaphor, plant seeds, in different places, whether it's blogging or social media posts or starting a podcast or whatever, that you enjoy doing, where maybe these authors don't need you right now, but they save the email they get from you, and 6 months from now they reply to it. And, I did a lot of cold emailing when I was first moving into working with private clients. And, you send out 100 emails and you don't hear back from anyone, and you think they've all deleted them, like no one's going to hire me. And then 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later, you get a reply, and you could see the date of the original email you sent out and go, oh, they didn't delete it. They just saved it, like they just weren't ready yet. And
academic projects are very slow, right? And they have these huge, long timelines of years sometimes before someone needs help with something, or they're working on something and it gets put aside for 6 months and then picked up. And I think there's just this role of projects in academia that, and a sort of a pace that's very slow. So for me, I think I've just trust myself and draw on resources like yours, and then also just expect for some not happy accidents like what have been happening so far, that these book projects come along or some other opportunities. I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done out there, and it's getting your name out. And I think I was quite scared to do that for the first few months, or I wasn't sure was it viable or feasible. And it was important for me to really, okay, I'm still surviving. I'm here 7 months later, and I've had a really great time, and it's allowed me to live this life I wanted to live. So that's I just have to keep that going.
That's great. It sounds like you've been successful, and that you've got all the foundation in place, to keep growing and to keep getting referrals and attracting new clients. So congratulations on making that transition. And speaking of referrals, if anybody wants to work with you, how can they find you and get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn, I think, is where I first came across your work. I think it's actually I didn't use it for many years, but I do think if they want to reach out to me there, that's a really good tool in general for coming across opportunities, but also for people to reach me. So Tom Smith, there's quite a few of me, but if you search, I'll pop up there somewhere.
And I'll link to. Oh, sorry, I'll link to your profile so they find the right Tom Smith.
Yeah, sure. There's also dr-smith-editing.com. So that's the website that I'm sort of figuring out, okay, how do I use this properly, and how do I share it, and how do I drive traffic to it? And I haven't really started in that process. So that's another place to sort of just read some basics around my background and a little bit of my story and what I do. And and then thomas.sid.smith@gmail.com is my email. So maybe you can just reach out on LinkedIn, would be better.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Tom. This has been a really great conversation. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Paulina. Thanks for having me.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.